Start video content marketing today without feeling like a fraud. In this video, I'm going to help you figure out if you've got a case of imposter syndrome.
That man is the imposter.
And how to overcome it so that you can begin video content marketing with confidence. Perhaps you've been wanting to get started with video content marketing for a while now, but you keep talking yourself out of it or delaying beginning. But are your reasons legitimate? Or are you just afraid? Imposter syndrome is a behavioral health phenomenon where high-achieving individuals experience self-doubt of intellect, skills, or accomplishments. It's true that video content marketing takes courage, vulnerability, and confidence. And if you're suffering from imposter syndrome, it's important to address it so that it doesn't get in the way of you doing the most important thing to succeeding in content marketing: getting started and keeping going. But how can you be sure you have imposter syndrome? We're going to unpack it in just a moment and then dive into the key thing you can do to overcome it. The symptoms of imposter syndrome include feelings of self-doubt, anxiety, depression, or fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Maybe you're familiar with some of these symptoms, but to know for sure that what you're suffering from is imposter syndrome, we need to narrow things down further. There are actually 5 forms of imposter syndrome. See if you can relate to any of them as I briefly unpack each of them now. Perfectionism is where you set impossible standards and strive to be the best, which then leads to work martyrdom, which is sacrificing yourself for a so-called greater good, overgeneralizing mistakes as a lack of ability, or overly critical self-reflection. Self-heroism is intrinsically related to perfectionism. It often presents as a tendency to over-prepare for tasks to appear more than capable of completing them. Denial of competence and capability is closely tied to perfectionism, where you tend to downplay your intelligence, experience, skills, and natural talents. You attribute your success to external influence or random chance, despite evidence saying otherwise. Atychiphobia, or fear of failure, manifests when faced with an achievement-related task and you experience anxiety or the fear of being humiliated if you fail or do worse than your peer, exposing you as the imposter if you were to fail. Achievemephobia, or fear of success, describes the fear that succeeding may lead to higher expectations that you cannot possibly keep, or a fear of an increase of workload. So, can you relate to any of these forms of imposter syndrome? I can. I've experienced imposter syndrome several times throughout my life. The most recent example was in the form of Atychiphobia with the release of Perlo. For those of you that are just joining us, I'm a published author of a fantasy fiction series, The Hidden Grove. It's about a girl who runs away with her boyfriend when she should have run away from him. It's inspired by my own experiences at the hands of an abusive boyfriend when I was a teenager. And I wrote this series as a warning to other young women so that no one has to go through what I went through ever again. I remember a distinct conversation with my brother just before I published my first novel in the series, Perlo, and how he was encouraging me to become a spokesperson against domestic violence. I felt a deep internal resistance, first to the label of being a domestic violence survivor, and second to the idea of being a spokesperson against it. I felt like I didn't know enough or wasn't qualified enough to be a thought leader in domestic violence. And I was afraid of being exposed as a fraud, a classic Atychiphobia symptom. But I realized that the silly thing about it was, because of my lived experience, I have just as much of a right and authority to speak about it as does a family counsellor or a lecturer who's made it their life's work to build their knowledge and authority to talk about domestic violence. I just have a different, equally valuable angle to offer. That my perspective on domestic violence is just as valid and needed as a voice in the world. That my experience and who I am is something unique to offer to the world. And the key thing to overcoming imposter syndrome in video content marketing is taking an honest look at who you are and all you have to offer and owning it as part of your identity. You have to make the first move. Don't wait for someone like my brother to tell you or give you permission, because it may never happen. Don't wait for a sign saying you are learned enough, talented enough, or qualified enough to speak up about something you are perfectly positioned to speak into. Because no one will take you seriously until you take yourself seriously first. Most people wrongly assume that humility means to make yourself smaller. True humility means being able to honestly evaluate yourself and admit to your shortcomings as well as your strengths. You know what sets you apart from other people. You know what your unique cross-section of skills, gifts, experience, qualifications, interests, and passions are. But are you brave enough to take ownership of them? Or are you going to hide yourself for forever? One of the arguments my brother made was that it was my responsibility to talk about my experience of domestic violence. That I was denying something from the world by not sharing my story, by not sharing my learnings with other young women. Now, I'm not saying that you need to be a thought leader in every significant learning of your life. In the context of video content marketing, this won't work. You need to be laser focused on one thing you want your audience to identify you with, your sweet spot and tilt. For the sake of the message of the Hidden Grove series, I will stand up against domestic violence. But there is also so much more to me, other valuable parts that I feel I have to impart upon the world, some of which I'm still discovering. And through Lamplight's video content marketing, I'm exploring just one of them, marketing education. So, don't let imposter syndrome stop you from realizing your video content marketing dreams. Perhaps you are at the beginning of your journey and your ideas are still undeveloped. That is okay. Passion will be enough to tie you over. Just look at YouTuber Mark from Sustainable Me and how he's learned as we learned alongside him. Now, he's mentoring other backyard gardeners and imparting all he's learned along the way. In the world of video content marketing, this is gold. His vulnerability has endeared him to his audience. But if he waited until he was learned enough, where would he be now? Would his channel not exist? Would his followers be the lesser for it? I would be. I've learnt so much from his experimentation in the garden. So, the best thing you can do is get started. As Sean always says, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the best time to start content marketing is yesterday. So start making video content today. What are you going to do with your unique, unrepeatable life? No one else will do it for you.